All right, good morning. It is Thursday with the Explicit Measures Podcast. Good morning, Tommy and Seth. How are things going?
Happy Thursday, Mike.
Good morning.
It's a Thursday.
Man, shocked me.
I had to, because as I was saying offline, I'm not going to have a cup of coffee this morning because I ran out, which is a bad way to start a day.
It is.
Say that.
We have two coffee machines in case one doesn't work, so we have a backup. We have a backup machine.
Well, that's great, but two coffee machines still don't do anything to that coffee beans.
For you,
Still need the coffee. Yes.
I can't hand them over to you. Yes, very true. Very true. Any kind of fun things? We had a huge storm roll through last night, so I'm kind of like out of it a little bit this morning. So I woke up at the 1:30 time when I've never seen a storm with so much thunder. It was constant. I have not. It was like it was a rumble for like an hour, and I was like, I've never seen so much. I went downstairs and I was like looking out the window. It was coming down in buckets. It was intense. So we had the whole siren thing going off. They were saying, take shelter. There might be tornadoes. The whole 9 yards. So it was a big deal, and I am now tired because I was up for 3 hours because of it.
So, I've had the lucky opportunity now to be part of a hurricane and a tornado.
Whoa!
Oh, that's
I did not know
exciting.
this.
Yeah. So, again, living in Tampa was
True.
There's going to be a hurricane or two. There's pros and cons to each. I would have to say.
But tornadoes in Tampa? Was the tornado in Tampa?
No, the tornado was here in Chicago.
Oh, in Chicago.
It hit like a half a mile away. This was just like a month ago.
What?
You heard the siren. So I would say both of them have their a hurricane. You obviously it's coming. There's the evacuation process. You don't know what's going to happen. The tornado feels like you're getting bombed. Like you're like everyone to the basement, and you hear the alarm, and you're like, I don't know if I'm just gonna just see the roof come off. So, but it doesn't last that long.
Yeah.
Are you drawing the correlation between bombed because you've seen movies, or have you been bombed before as well?
No, not yet. So, gotta get off the bucket list. So,
Oh my goodness, Tommy.
Well, are we recording? We'll edit that out.
Well, yeah, that's an edit out. All right.
Honestly, I'm still recovering from the user group.
It was a whirlwind this
on
week.
that night.
Yeah, we've had a lot of videos this week, so it's just good. We had a lot of good content coming out. For those of you who follow along for the Power BI user group for Milwaukee and Chicago, it's on the Power BI Tips user channel. We just recently streamed a Monday session around Power Apps and doing Power App portals. On Tuesday, we did another session around Tabular Editor. And if I had to give a guess, the Tabular Editor session is going to be really good because everyone loves Tabular Editor and everyone wants to learn about it. Frankly, yeah, those are some of the most popular videos we have on YouTube is instructions about how to use Tabular Editor. So I think that's going to be my next series on instructional videos. It's going to be just all about the basics of Tabular Editor 3, the one that just came out, and going through that program.
Yeah, quite. This is further showing that we need to do a Sirius FM radio show because we're producing content like crazy. Look, you have 2 user groups in a week, 2 podcasts. That's 4 days of content.
There you go. Boom. We're almost at 5 days now.
Yeah.
All right. So today's topic, right, jumping in here with other topics, is all about experimenting in Power BI. And Tommy, this was kind of your topic. So give us kind of like the run around, like give us the high level. What do you mean by experimenting in Power BI?
So I'm really excited for this one compared to Tuesday. This is a lot more lighthearted, but it's all about trying new things. And I think sometimes we don't give enough credit or enough weight to trying, experimenting, learning new things in Power BI, whether it's trying a new DAX function, trying something in Power Query, experimenting with visuals. I think a lot of times, we're just kind of producing content, like we're taking the input, processing it, and outputting what we know. But there needs to be time for, I want to learn how to do bookmarks in a really neat way. Or what can you do with a function in Power Query? Like how can you create a loop or a parameter? Things that you may not be aware of how to do, but taking the time to learn it. And why we say experimenting and not breaking is because hopefully you're not using an existing report, because you can very much break things. So it's really about just avenues, methodologies, and just our own personal experiences with what do we use to experiment? What are some of the approaches that we've done, and what is the real like outcome of that, and the value of it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So I would say a lot of times I'll talk a little bit about how my process works, and I think Seth has adopted a lot of my process as well. I find when I'm working on part of this, well, I mean, this was something that was new to kind of both of us, and we kind of take things into experiments. So, let's say you have a large data model or a larger data model. You're working on some customer tables, maybe some sales information that are in there, and you're trying to figure out a DAX formula. Someone asks you for a complex DAX formula, and you're not sure if that's like, do I shape the data differently? Do I write a DAX equation that can do this? Do I need to make a virtual table inside a DAX statement to get the answer that I need? I don't really know what I'm looking for yet, so I need to experiment. So what I found that was very helpful would be is I would spend the 5 minutes or so, I would mock up the data, and I literally would make, go to the tables and say, okay, I've got like a numerical column, I've got a name column, that would be like a string, and I'd kind of go through the data set and kind of mock up information. And if there's bad data in it that I'm trying to clean out, I'll add a similar error or bad data, like, oh, there's a bunch of nulls in here. Okay, I'll add a couple nulls in these files in this section here, and then I'll go and experiment. So I find this is very helpful because now you're dealing with like 100 rows of data, and you can spot check your formulas. So if you have 6 categories, you can say, okay, I can go to Excel and I can add up those 6 categories and actually get the number. And so, okay, I know that this is working correctly because it's actually calculating it correctly in my sample. And then you can have confidence that whatever you rebuild into the actual model is now working correctly. So that's a technique I use a lot. Go offline, build a dummy data set, and do your work there.
It's a good one.
You bring up, yeah, go ahead. I took enough.
Seth's coffee has not kicked in.
I was laughing because the way you started was, oh yeah, I've developed this process, and Seth follows the whole thing. I was like, oh geez, where are we going with this? Oh yeah, like this test thing, sure.
Yeah, testing thing.
I took a little bit of separate bent because we've talked about processes and how we build reports, and we've actually talked like that should be part of when you're developing measures. I took a little bit of a different variation on the chat this morning just to grab a lot of the ad hoc analysis type, I don't know how to do it sort of, or new feature kind of thing recommendations.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is in terms of experimenting, when you read the monthly release of features, like experimenting to me is not just reading it, it's going out and pulling down the custom visuals and playing with them. Or they tell you in the blog that you can do this new thing in the service.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, okay, great, I know how to do that. But if I think back, and time has changed since 5 years ago, so the amount of time I have to play and dig into things deeply has minimized, but I learned the most, and you do consistently when you read it and do it. Like, go do the thing that they just released, because what you will always find is there are gotchas. There's some scenario where it works, and there's some scenario where it doesn't. And the experimenting or testing of a feature, right, it is one of the best ways you'll actually get a solid understanding of new features, or for custom visuals. How do you work with that custom visual? Because I can't tell you how many times within the last 2-3 months I've been looking for a specific custom visual and gone out and grabbed something hoping it would work, and it failing miserably because it just doesn't work with the data set that I have.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing I say. Read it, do it, and it builds this back end lexicon of like all of the things that work or don't work for certain scenarios.
And I love the 2 avenues that you guys went down, because I think those are probably like the biggest weight in terms of why experiment. You have one, which is you're working on something, an actual project. There's an actual outcome that you're trying to achieve, and trying to take that and minimize it to be able to find the solution. And the other one is almost a exploratory, where it's just the way you said that's perfect, like building your lexicon of whenever there's new features that come out, even if you're not working on anything that has related to that new feature, like the dual axis line chart. Well, just see how it works. Building that knowledge is just as important as if you're actually working on this a particular solution. And the reason is building that repository in your head. What I've seen happen to me is, again, like trying a custom visual out or just trying something I've read in a blog and downloading the sample file, is some point in the future there's a scenario that comes up or a project, and you're like, oh, I know exactly what we can apply here. I've done this. And that to me is like, you're almost like the knowledge and those little gotchas and those little intricacies kind of build up your arsenal. I've seen this in Power Apps too, where I would just, I joke about this all the time, but the first Power App I ever created was for my wife when she was a contraction Power App, which did not work very well, and nor was it applied during the time. But I was learning certain things about it and like how Power Apps worked. And then now we'll have situations where, like, we would really love to do something automated. It's like, I'm like, oh yeah, we can apply this and then use Power BI to pull in the data this way. But a lot of that's coming from not the contraction app, but from other scenarios of just pulling in the knowledge, pulling in experience that you're doing.
So I'd also, another one here I want to echo here. I think this is something that I fell into as a problem as a new Power BI developer in the beginning phases. So when I wasn't doing this more rigorous method around experimentation and testing things, I found that my initial reports were just much junkier, right? So a new feature would come out and I'd be like, I would love to try it. And every report I would do would have this new, like, oh boy, drill throughs here. Like, let's put drill through on everything that we need. And I wasn't really thinking about the user experience. And I think also too, at the initial phases here, there were so many large, and again, if you think about a product when it's coming out for the first time, I feel like in the beginning, there's a lot of very large leaps and bounds that it's growing, it's changing by. Hey, we've got themes now. Okay, great. I'm going to spend 2 weeks just doing themes on everything that I want to do now. So I think there's this habit, especially when you start learning a program for the first time, is to everything you learn that is new has to become part of your next report that you're building. And so I think over time, you get a little bit more mature at that, and you start saying, okay, I don't need to add, every time something happens, I don't need to go add another, feature set to my reports. And then sometimes I feel like my reports suffered because I was experimenting too much and building stuff for them.
And that kind of dovetails into my second point too, Mike, which is a issue. I fell into the same trap, right? Like I wanted to do something or implement something in an existing report. And I would find that I'd fall my way into a place I didn't want to be, and I couldn't unwind it. Right. And you do that one time, and then you're on your main report, and then you're like, I need to save some extra copies of this or whatnot. What I do now is I will just start with a side copy. I'll save a PBIX copy,
that's a good one. I like that.
Intentionally, like carve it off, open that thing up, and then just go dig into and analyze a bunch of data, or rip it apart and move things around. And ultimately that thought exercise and modification of so many elements in the report typically distills down to, I want to do these 3 things. And then I go back to my main report and I make those 3 changes and then just deploy it. Because there have been times, and it hasn't happened to me in a really long time, but if you start messing around too much, you could wedge the file, right? Where like you get into a state where it's like, hey, contact us because you did something stupid. And you just, and develop and things that you always want to have that safety mechanism of having the separate file, working within that, making the changes, and kind of distilling down to, the 1 or 2 or 3 changes you're going to make in your main report and model, and then deploy that.
I feel like one thing I've also noticed here, especially with this, is the thin report and the model. So we talk about this idea of like having 2 reports, right? There's one report that represents all the data of the model, and there's another report that represents the thin report. And I think another thing I do a lot when I'm experimenting with data is I have a lot of tables built, frankly, if I'm being honest. Like if I'm trying to figure out what I want to build, or what is the data doing, or how do I create a measure, I typically I go to a blank page, and I build out 5 or 6 tables, and I'll just start playing with measures. And so now now that we have this two model concept, so we have this the concept where we could have a core. The model can contain basic measures, and I'm finding initially when I did a lot of this stuff and experimenting, I would put too many measures in the main model. Like you literally want your main model to be like columns and sums, basically sums of things or averages of things. I don't think you want it to be too complex.
Yeah.
If you're going to reuse business logic in a thin report, and this is a report that's live connected back to the model, if you know you want to reuse that logic or group of measures, then you want to bring them back to the main model. So there is, I think, a growth pattern there, but I didn't really understand the interplay between the thin report and the model. And so I built too many measures in the main model that were only for one report. And so it was confusing when I added other thin reports. And now what I'll do is if I'm experimenting, I'll make a thin report that has nothing in it. And I'll just start, that's how I'll experiment now. I have a model that's deployed somewhere or a model that's local on my machine. I'll connect up a thin report to that model and I'll just go to town. I'll start making stuff. I'll make all my tables. I'll start building out measures. And then when I find I have a measure that I like, I'll then use, Tabulator Dirt 3, and then I'll go add that into my main model using that program. So just push the measure in. So I think that's another pattern that I think I've found that works well, is this whole concept of using the thin reports seems to me to be a bit safer than building the model inside the file, because I have less errors and debugging issues, because the thin report is a thin report. There's no model there.
Man, you guys bring up some experiences in my head that just from the past. First, Mike, though I love the idea with the thin model. The only thing you're limited when it's a direct query, because then you can't actually experiment in Power Query as much when it's a thin model.
Yeah, you lose part of that. Yes,
you lose a lot of the experience.
But we're not. To be clear, we're not talking about direct query. We're talking about a live connection.
Live connection.
Yeah.
Or you could do the direct question via AS. But
Yes.
but you lose a lot of the functionality you would of being able to experiment. And then the one thing, Seth, that you brought up like probably 18 pop-ups in my head. I was just experimenting with themes from this podcast conversation of episodes back, and I started getting an error on one of our main reports saying the color is undefined, and I could not. Every time I would click on the close the pop-up, it would show up again.
Yeah.
And I was like, what does that mean? The color is undefined, or the color of the property is undefined.
Yeah.
And that was it. It didn't say this is undefined. So it realized that the theme colors I had did not jive with one of my custom visuals. Who knew?
Yeah. What that means is you open Task Manager and end task, right?
And yes, yeah. There's a lot of that too, but the importance of like that save a copy of the V1 or V2 to experiment. So, and I mean, there's a lot of, you could say there's a lot of good of working on your current data set. To be honest, I use a lot of data sets of like actually using either like a baseball repository, or even using like Azure SQL database, like sample database, just experimenting things.
Yep.
It's so like Mike. I'll give Mike credit for this one too.
That's two. I get 2 credits. Yay.
I moved away from my own sample data or my own data set to the sample data set in the Power BI.
Yeah,
like,
I do too.
Just become familiar with that. Like it like the fact that they the fact that they added that in there now is much better. I'm amazed at some of the beautiful pictures of what is going on with my video on YouTube right now.
I think you look a little better now.
It came back.
Okay.
Something's wrong with your bit stream. It's like having a hard time keeping up with your. You turned into like a rain. I said Seth got caught in a rainstorm.
I told you that the coffee was going to have
effects.
Some impacts. I just didn't know.
You need to support all over your keyboard.
Translate into the computer as well. I did want to dovetail on one of Mike's comments as you, Mike, were talking about measures and thin reports.
Yeah.
This kind of stretches outside of experimenting, but maybe not, right? Is local versus, a model that's local versus what's in the service, right?
Yeah, this is a big point.
And if I'm a huge fan of the read-write enablement on the XMLA endpoint, especially for large models. And this kind of brings to mind, the argument of Tommy, you're saying Power Query and, that can only be done in the main model, and you're right. But, to me, experimenting with measures is completely different. There's no measure. There's nothing lost there.
Yeah.
But one of the huge tricks that I've found extremely useful is if you have to modify your Power Query in your main model,
yes,
you can actually do that locally, like say on a really large model, right? You can modify your view to limit down to 100 rows or something.
Yep.
Make the changes you need to ensure that you don't have to modify anything in your Power Query, or if you do locally, you have the ability now with read write XMLA endpoint to go into SQL Server Management Studio, open the table, get to the Power Query code within there, and directly modify the definition of how that table refreshes.
Yep.
So you're doing all of the mucking around and changing and experimenting and making sure that any view changes on the back end don't mess around with the next refresh. And you're going through this process where you don't have to publish the entirety of that whole model. You can just do it in this place and then make the surgical incision into the model itself that's already deployed to the service. I love that trick. Use it a lot.
And they're making a lot of updates to the direct query and analysis servers, like the XML rewrite. I know there's still some bugs though, and so for example, I was experimenting with Tabular Editor 3, and one of the prominent blogs on it, I can't remember the name of the blog. He always writes all the C scripts, is creating a data dictionary. Well, it turns out if you write to a data set in the service using Premium, and you modify that data set in any way, like any of the data source definitions, you can no longer download that report. It changes the metadata of that. And unfortunately, I found that out the hard way. And so because one of the articles was creating a data dictionary, and what it would do is it would actually look at all the metadata and basically write annotations to each column and measure, and then also write create a table for a data dictionary, which is also an Excel table somehow. But because of that, if you run that in a live data set, that data set is no longer able to download.
Yep.
So
I forget about that because a lot of the models we work on right now are big so enough. Large, I wouldn't want to do it anyway.
You couldn't download these models.
It saves me from people going out and be like, "Oh, download that. Oh, it doesn't work."
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, we want it that way.
Yeah. So there's I personally stay away from, when it comes to experimenting.
Yes.
I personally stay away from a live data set or even the connection, because it depends what you're trying to do, but I think a lot of stuff I've learned in Power Query, my functions, my parameters that I use pretty frequently now, I learned from a lot of the blogs out there where they would talk about pagination, or iterative feedback. Like one of the guys basically took the whole Power Apps or the Power Query documentation and made a report off of it just by extracting certain parts of it, but it was all a function and parameter in it.
Yeah.
So for me, I love that side of it, that I can experiment with something that I know is not connected or related in any way. And also being able to have that local, test something in a group by, doing a sub index in a group by. You can break something pretty easily there. If it's a live data set, then you might not be able to, but being able to do that in something completely unconnected, I have found more benefits for.
Let me ask something, Tommy. When you're talking about live connections, are you always talking about a model that's in the service and you're live connecting to the service?
So, you can make that live connection direct query too, right?
No.
Yeah. No. It's direct query from analysis service.
Two different things.
Two different things.
You're hitting on one of my biggest pet peeves, Tommy. You better watch it. Watch it.
So there's a live there's live connection with a Power BI data set.
Yeah, so that's
then there's direct query through analysis services.
Correct. So that's yeah,
two distinct different things.
Those are two distinct different things. But I'm talking about when you're talking about, you said there's a lot of live connection challenges you have or kind of things. Do you do live connection locally?
a live connection locally.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is, so this is something I want to define for people who are not who are listening along. There's this concept. So there's the PowerBI.com service. I can publish a model there, and then I can connect a new thin report to that PowerBI.com experience. But I can also, and this is what Steve Campbell on Power BI Tips built for us, there's a hot swap connection piece. And so there's this idea of like, if I'm doing experimenting, right, I may have a model in the service and I may not want to touch that or change it, right? I may want to have something locally that I can really just break, right? To your point, Tommy, right? I can't modify the M once I've published something to the service. I've already kind of done that and it's complete. So this is the challenge right now that I see today is there is no ability for me to connect my thin report to an XMLA endpoint. It does not work at this point, and at least it didn't work the last time I tested it, like about a couple months ago. But that being said, I can connect to a data set in PowerBI.com because the thin report has there's some connection string in there that you can't modify. Once you make a live connection to a PowerBI.com thing, you can't change it without code. And so this is why I want to bring up the hot swap connection. So Steve Campbell off of Power BI Tips made a hot swap connections connector, which you can download from the Power BI Tips Business Ops application. So we made an installer for it to make it nice and easy for you to manage this thing and get other helpful external tools. But what this does is it basically allows you to take a model, open a model up on your local machine, open a thin report on your local machine, and if that thin report was previously connected to PowerBI.com, you can rip out the data connection and automatically point it to the local connection, which I find that from an experimentation standpoint is very helpful because now I'm developing, I can take stuff that I've published to the service or things that I was connected to the service, and now I can rip that out and do it locally, do all of my development work, and then when I'm happy with it, I can publish the model. I can strip the connection again out of the local file and then reconnect it back to the service. So to me, one of my main workflows, particularly around experimentation or developing or enhancing, is using hot swap connections to switch out whether or not this file is working out on local or it's in service.
I've actually used that more than I thought I would.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
To be honest, that is a little intimidating the first time you use it, but once you kind of get the hang of how it works, I would never experiment with that though. That I fail to see why can you just more use a sample data set. Maybe it's just because of the fear of what you could break, because there is a sensitivity of it. Obviously, when you do the hot swap, you're not connected to the live data set anymore.
Because you've invested all of those hours in your model, in your measures, in your base, everything. I don't want to recreate that or start over. Right? Yeah. Like I want to add something, or I want to play around with potentially whether or not this thing's going to work in the ecosystem that I built behind the scenes. Right? That's why. Yeah. You just plug on the direct query versus live connection thing.
I think I explained myself pretty well.
You know what would be you did.
All right. Yeah.
Well, like Mike, I think what's interesting to me is in your description. I wonder if that's not necessarily a breakdown of the tool, but of the differences between versions of tabular models, right? Because Power BI is always on the most recent, and it's on a newer version of anything that's available in just raw analysis services of any flavor.
But why wouldn't they let me just switch it though? Like this, so that's my biggest qualm here.
Depends on the version.
Well, yeah, like what Adhoc Analysis.
Do you have supported features, right, that are unsupported features in Power BI that you're like would just turn everything into gook,
or scary or deprecated features in an older version?
Maybe, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, more elegant in other, it's been a while now, but I'm pretty sure you had just a warning box or something saying you couldn't do it, back in.
Well, let me paint you a different picture then, right? So we're talking PowerBI.com, right? So if I had two analysis services just running in Azure and they were on different versions of the model, I could connect a thin report to that. And then all I'd have to do is switch out the connection string between the two things. And so like at that point, like I'm now taking my thin report and switching the versions on the analysis service in the back end. So in my mind is it's all technically feasible. It's all technically there. So the fact that I'm
sure.
like,
yeah,
but that's on the report author. Maybe they decided to not let you have that. But like, it
Well,
just seems stupid to me that I have to run a PowerShell script to like switch between local and service. It just seems dumb.
I don't think it's stupid because also if you ever usually Power BI is pretty good from month to month, but sometimes there's features in a certain month's release. Like if you publish you're saying your base model into the service and you did that months ago, and now you're trying to immediately do the hotspot connection with a different version of Power BI. Not saying you're going to run into problems, but there's a likelihood there, and there are occurrences where that's happened before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a problem switching between versions. I'm just saying I'm more around of give me the capability to do it. I don't want you to limit me in that way. I would rather have the ability to switch it whenever I want.
I get what you're saying, Mike, but at the same time, like,
are we talking? So maybe
think about like enabling that capability, and having to support it. Like, what did you do? Like, I was out here and I clicked on this, and then I connected to this model. It's different.
There'd be
like,
so many support tickets from Microsoft. Man. They would have to hire someone just to work on these tickets.
And this may be also this may also be something around like this may be the difference between IT and business, right? So maybe there's a thought here of like a business user should not have to be able to should not have the capability of switching models, and an IT user they expect to know, hey, the different model versions are different. So analysis services is more IT centric.
You want to talk about your capabilities for self-service?
Let's start arguing. We haven't had enough arguing in this
admin
podcast.
level enablement of connecting to different AS models.
Yeah. That actually so this brings up an interesting idea of
course it does. That's why I brought it up.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. But we're talking a lot about like our experimentation as more or less you call them business IT or business devs.
Well, now we're bringing that in because but I've been
right.
My perspective up to this point has been business, but now you're bringing in IT here, Tommy.
We were talking about drill through, and also we went to I need to use PowerShell too. So that took a wide turn.
We're in left field right now.
Yeah, we are knee deep. But for self-service, that's to quietly or lightly tread on that path, not necessarily go knee deep, but what capabilities would you give for someone from a self-service experimentation? Like if you were to give someone a blank report connected to a data set, are you giving them that much limitations, or what kind of
okay, you're right. So I think what you're saying here is you're talking now about experimentation at different skill levels, right? So
yes,
Seth has very clearly, and I think Seth and Steve Campbell on Power BI Tips have lined out like what is your skill set, like what is the spectrum of skills we're talking about in the Power BI realm.
Yeah.
And so I want to frame this with like we know there is a data modeler person. So there's a person who's doing modeling, particularly that would probably be an M. You need to be comfortable in M. You need to be loading tables. I would also echo that you probably need to be comfortable in SQL and being able to make SQL views of data. And then there's the person that's the report builder. And the report builder and the data modeler could be the same person, but that doesn't have to be. So you might have someone who's just, I'm the report builder. You produce to me a model, and then from there I build things in the report layer. And so let me rephrase your question just slightly here, Tommy, to make sure I understand it, right? Are you saying, does the experimentation change based on the role that I'm in? I'm either a modeler, a report builder, or I'm a consumer, right? Does that change?
Yes. And the beauty of this podcast now is I know I can spit out a bunch of words that kind of correlate. And I know Mike can like process and filter.
I trust you guys. I trust you.
Because I know I'm like, I just need to say a certain
trust
word.
fall, Tommy. Trust fall.
So that's the beauty of we're fine-tuned machine now, well-oiled machine.
Yes.
But that's the posed question.
Okay. So I definitely, I don't know if I have a lot of techniques for the thin report builder, right? So if I'm connecting thin reports to model and experimenting there, the only technique I think I would use based on what I already do today would be around this, like as a thin report builder, I need to understand how the data works and how it works between the models. I know models can get very complicated, and if you don't design a very simple or organized model, there's stuff in the model. You'll put a column on a table and the value will be the same number for every single item in that list of dimensions, and you don't know why. And so you have to go like now you have to go look at the relationships inside that thin report and see like, okay, what is it doing? Is it bidirectional or not, or is it which way is it going? What's a dimension? What's a fact? So I think it's really important for us as modelers, people modeling the data, is to be very clear about what's going on. And I'm now getting to the point where I think your fact tables should have only hidden columns and measures in them at this point. So like I think we're if I looked at I'm drawing a parallel between what I used to do in like the business objects days, right? We had dimensions and then I had calculations or measures or whatever you would call them, and you would literally any dimension that would show up on the page, you could then drop a measure or a calculation on top of it, and it would kind of just work. So I think it takes a lot more work for the modeler to be able to do that to allow a thin report builder to experiment correctly.
So let me ask a question, and it's because I don't know it. Usually how questions work.
Well-oiled machine.
Well-oiled.
Yeah. Hey, at least I got coffee. Coffee came midstream.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Hand delivered.
If you're hiding columns though in the main model and you're a thin report guy, like you're not going to see those.
Right.
So then now I have an extra step of trying to go enable that, and now I'm in the crap. I've got to go fix a bunch of stuff before I can add a measure in my thin report.
Yeah, and that takes away a lot of the experimentation too.
Well,
like,
we just dovetailed into like how do you manage a model, but
yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm just saying like, how is that approach better than other ones, Mike, you've implemented in the past where you have all of your measures in separate table?
So honestly, I feel like I don't like the measures in a separate table anymore. Like I did that for a while. I thought that was like a really good thing, but I find in larger models when there's lots and lots of measures, you click one item and then I'm trying to be like context aware of like unless there's clean folders. Like if you put folders in it,
of where you're.
I lose track of them all. And then like I don't know what those measures pertain to. So I feel like there's like a general feeling now that I feel like okay, so things I like to do now. I'll just give you some things I like to do, and maybe this is experimentation wise, maybe this is just general model management now. But I like putting folders in the table where those measures are going to live, and it becomes much easier to build measures with Tabular Editor 3. I'm going to keep tooting that horn all day long because I can make a measure in a folder, and I can't do that in desktop. So like I love that, and I like actually having like I'll even name my folders so they go to the top of the list. So I'll do like an underscore and then the name of it, like KPIs or something like that. And if there's specific measures that I'm using, and for example, if I'm using them external to the model, right? If I have other services hitting my data model other than Power BI, because you can do that, you can call APIs to go hit your data model. I'll make a separate folder for them. So then I even keep track of, okay, these are external measures that are required in this model, even though it's not used anywhere in the model. Other people are relying on those measures to be there. So I feel like all of that makes sense more when I can go, okay, I now have 10 reports, and 3 of the reports are looking at one fact table, and 6 of the reports are looking at another. Well, did I say 6, 4, 3? There's not 9. Numbers don't add up. Coffee's not hitting. But like, you have these groups of like, you may not use every fact table in every report, especially when you get larger models that are supporting many reports. You might actually have a couple fact tables that are there, a common date dimension that's across reports. But now and so dropping all the measures into one large table now confuses me because I don't know which report or which groups of measures I'm looking at now. So I like to put measures in the fact table now, and I think that's where I'd like to hang up most of them now.
Mike, I'm glad that we followed the same path, so to speak, at least on here, because if you actually look at some of my previous presentations, like
measure table.
Yeah, it was in the slides. It said you better be doing measure tables.
Yep.
But when display folders kind of came about, and then seeing the implication of it from an organization point of view, not only do I do measures, I do columns too.
Yes.
So wherever the measure, like the base measure is, that's where or whatever fact table that's where the measure is going. And so from an organization point of view, it makes perfect sense because you know what you're going to be pulling from.
Yes.
I'll give an example: a marketing report that has social media, Google Ads, email, Google Analytics, and commerce.
Yep.
Like, are you going to? Before I would create 5 measure tables, but that still doesn't follow the same logic. Now if I'm looking for an email metric, it's an email fact table.
Yep,
under
exactly.
the display folder, and I'll create even sub display folders, like if there's a
Yep.
combination of each, if there's an ROI one.
Yep.
So no, like since I kind of went on that path, and I was, again, a measure table only guy.
Yep.
It just makes more sense, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I
don't
agree
know
with
that-
you guys.
It's not a thing,
The
but
description, no, the description of it is good. It's like I was a measure folder only guy, but now I'm different.
But I think also too for me, like the reason why I'm doing this differently now is because I'm actually using new tooling that makes it easier for me to make those things.
Sure.
Like in desktop, you still have to, if you want to make a folder in desktop, it's actually quite painful. You have to create the measure because you can't create it in a folder in the
load
report
time.
view or the table view. You have to create the measure in one view, and then you
yeah.
have to switch to a different view, and you have to switch to the relationship view where you can't create measures. Like, what the heck, people? Like, I can't freaking create or edit one. Like, I'm editing a measure, or maybe I'm changing the format of one of like the measure itself. Like, it's a format function, and I can't change it in the modeling view. And for whatever reason, Microsoft will not get it through their thick head that I need to edit measures on the relationship. I'm so burnt about that one. That one's going to be another whole topic all in of itself. But once I get to the
Why I'm
rel-
pissed at
How do you really
Microsoft.
feel?
dude,
Why-
I am.
why are you
That
so
is
angry?
that is a
Why are you so
simple
angry?
fix. Why?
Episode 27. Why Mike's pissed at Microsoft?
That just needs to be a thing. I'm sorry. Like I'm the report
I
developer,
agree.
and then once you get to the relationship view, now I can add measures to a folder, and then I can grab multiple measures and move them to a folder. I don't know if you could even. I don't think you can even add measures to a folder, even in the report view.
No,
So
you can't. You can only do it in the relationship view.
So frustrating to me.
You actually bring okay. There's a lot of good points there, because there's also experimenting in the tool, like in other tools, because that wasn't a conversation 2 years ago. But like experimenting in tabular editor can be its own thing as well.
So
That's a good point.
Kevin literally saw fire coming out of my head on my comments, because he's like, Mike's literally on fire at this point.
Did
Yeah.
we have an abusive episode today? Like somebody thought I was gonna hit Tommy in the head. We got fire coming out
This
of
was our-
Mike's.
this was our-
like all we were talking about was experimenting.
This was our easy topic after we cried on
Yeah,
on
as I
Tuesday.
said, this is our lighthearted one. So goodness.
Oh, I get so. Oh man, that one does really get me burnt. We'll see where that goes. If that one improves itself. So yeah. Anyways, the only other thing I would say is one other technique I think I would want to just throw in here, just for argument's sake, or for people listening online, is I really, when I started Power BI, I was heavily Power Query. Heavily. Like I would do everything in Power Query. I would overdo it in Power Query so much that I kind of, to my detriment, it would take a long time to load a model. And I think what I've done now is I've moved a lot away from, when your data gets larger and the challenges become more complex, I think you move further upstream to do the data engineering in a different system.
I agree.
And so I feel like there are some sources you can't get away with. Like if it's Google, you're probably not going to grab all your Google data and stick it in a SQL Server and do it there. Those sources will have to be done in Power Query, and I get it. You design for it. But like SQL databases are great. I'm doing a lot more work with views, and a technique I use for experimentation, particularly with views, is when I make a view, I'll make two views. I'll make one view that is the name of the table, the view table name, and then I'll add another table that is _ QA at the end of it, or test or something. And so what I'll do inside Power Query, I'll actually have Power Query run the table. I'll connect to the normal table, and then I actually make a parameter that lets me toggle between production and testing. And so when I do that, I then make another function that's an if statement. If the environment is set to production, then use the production view. If the environment is set to QA or testing, then what it will do is it'll actually concatenate in the text string. It'll go to the view of the table and concatenate on the end of it, or add to the end the _ test or the _ QA. So this way, I like this feature because when I'm playing with data or I'm making changes at the back end side of things, I have a view that I can just totally break. Add new columns, I can change data types, I can do all kinds of things with it. And then with one switch in the report side, I can switch the entire report from QA to production, or production to QA, to do my testing. And then if it breaks, it breaks. But I haven't changed my actual tables, because I can't tell you how many times I've changed a view and I was like, well, that wasn't a good change. I got to go back to it. So what did I just do? I'm commenting tons of lines of code. It's not good. And so then what I'll do is I'll use that technique to do the back end experimentation, get my table right, and then I'll switch it. And when it does it, you can switch. So the reason I'm using this is you can switch multiple tables at once. I could have 5 tables that are all needing to look at the QA data or the test data. I can switch them all at once. One button click, boom, done.
So the one thing I'll say to that is that is a limited data source scenario, because APIs do not work with that if you're trying to refresh it.
100%. Yeah.
So like for SQL, that's fine. But if you're doing anything with certain data sources, you will find errors unless you go to Chris Webb's blog and go,
But that would be
first.
If you're doing APIs though, you're not even in the realm of SQL at all. Like you're not in like a
no,
backend
you're
system.
not SQL, but you might be trying to experiment. So the one thing I'll say to what you said about growing upstream,
yeah,
I agree with that because that's a good model practice. But I would also recommend if you are experimenting or trying to solve a problem that maybe you're not sure how everything can group together.
Yep.
I would create a file with just the scenario I'm trying to solve. Like I'll connect to the data sources in Power Query base and try to do it in Power Query for 2 reasons. 1, to see what kind of output am I getting, and then 2, to also learn some things in Power Query. Just had the scenario with trying to connect to Bitly and then create to another social media platform, but we had to get
but those
another scenario.
But I would say you're
experiment.
You're experimenting with APIs. I think is a different animal altogether. I'm talking about things that come with views. Like this could be Spark. This could be SQL. This could be Snowflake. Like there are other data. Like if it has a semantic layer that wraps your data, that's when I would say you approach this. But to your point, like no level of APIs are going to be able to let you do a good dev test prod kind of thing.
Yeah, what I'm saying, if you need to do a lot of transformations from the source, I personally try to do it in Power Query in a separate file. One, to learn more things in Power Query.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to do something advanced, and then just create it in SQL too.
Yep.
Because if it's not available, if that view is not available,
because you can always just copy the advanced query and just drop it in, and then boom, you're
done. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or you can just just do it in SQL. But the more you learn Power Query, you can take 18 steps out of it because you learned how to just do it in 2. So.
Yep.
Anyway.
I will say that every time Power Query comes up and in a context that is like this experimentation, or how do you like be better at it, I want to throw in like one of the best places to like start that journey is Gil Raviv's blog on datachant.com. He's got common pitfalls of Power Query and outlines like I think the top 10. He lays it out in his book as well. But if you don't know ways in which to make your Power Query load faster and that efficiently, read that one blog and you'll just kind of sit there for an hour going, oh man, like how much stuff do I have to go back and refactor to speed up? But it kind of dovetails into experimenting, like read and understand some of these things to help you build efficient processes.
No, Seth, that's a perfect point. My last thing is try to experiment in Power Query off your report, like something completely separate, because you will learn how to take 5 queries and 55 steps. And you can learn like, oh, I don't need 40 of that. I can just do it in 3. Don't try to do your ad hoc trying to figure it out in your actual report file, because you'll bloat it down.
Well, what was the blog post that you were talking about, Seth, from DataChant?
Was it common pitfalls? I think is what you called it.
Okay, I'm gonna try and grab that one. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm trying to get that one in there on the chat window. All right. With that, I think we're actually at a good breaking point. I think this has been another really good arguing session between all of us. It's been excellent. With lots of opinions and good ideas. I think there's some, if nothing else, I hope there's a couple good ideas around how to, some experimentation things that we do that you can then incorporate into your own workflows as well. And hopefully you guys will find some cool things there. Thank you for everyone engaging in the conversation and the polls that we had on the chat. For those of you who are watching or watching it right after the podcast shows up, the chat actually takes a little time to get show up, I guess. It takes like around 12 to 24 hours before the chat shows up. So then you'll be able to see all the links that we are putting out in the chat window as well. Tommy, where can we find the podcast?
Oh, this is part of Thursdays I hate the most. But you can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are available: Apple, Spotify, anywhere you like a podcast, you can find the Explicit Measures Podcast. If you want to join in on the live conversation, if you're listening to this on the audio, go to Power BI Tips YouTube channel. All of our episodes are live streamed 7:30 in the morning Central Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want to suggest a topic, actually, I believe a topic next week is from a mailbag or from a suggestion from one of the listeners. You can go to powerbi.tips/explicit measures podcast. At the very bottom, there's a form, or mention Power BI Tips on Twitter with the hashtag EMP mailbag.
Awesome. Anything else?
Have a great weekend, fellas.
Have a great weekend.
I'll see you Tuesday.
Tommy's sad now.
Oh, I'll wait all week.
Long 5 days without Seth and Mike. Going through withdrawal. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again on Tuesday.